Okay, so last time we talked about non-human primate vocal and gestural communication. I tried to argue too that gestural communication was much more flexible. In using gestures, non-human primates have to pay attention to the attentional states of the other. And so it's a much more plausible forerunner to human linguistic communication from a psychological point of view, in the sense of being something that the individual controls and does intentionally to affect others, and so forth and so on. But these gestures are not shared. They're not bidirectional. They're not symbols in any sense. They're one-way procedures for getting things done. There are two types of them. There's the attention getters and the intention movements, and they each have their own properties, but again, they're not symbolic. When chimps are raised with humans, they quite often indicate things by something like a pointing gesture, but only for imperative purposes, not for declarative or informative purposes, just to get people to do things for them. And they only do this with humans, not with conspecifics. And so we're still not sure exactly what these things are, but I'm going to return to that a little bit again today. And when chimps are trying to comprehend a point, they can follow your point to a location, but they can't make the relevance inference. If you point to a location where something is hidden, they don't make the inference that that must be where it's located. So, and again, we're going to circle back to the chimps and the pointing a little bit later to compare to the human case. Okay, so now let's talk about humans. Let's talk about human gestures and pointing. And again, let me emphasize, I don't mean the gestures that accompany speech. I want to talk about pointing gestures or other kind of gestures that constitute entire speech acts on their own. And what I want to do is I want to start by giving just a little bit of a background. So this sort of number 2.1 in the handout, it's either 1 or 2 hour-long lectures on its own that I give sometimes, but it's not. But for purposes of today, focusing on communication, it's background. So I'm going to do this first part in about 10 or 15 minutes to give you the background, because what I want to do is argue to you that human beings are, in general, much more cooperative, and I'm going to define what that means, than other primates. And this is not just in communication, but across the board. And it implies certain skills and motivations of cooperation. So human beings are inordinately cooperative. For those of you who are not steeped in evolutionary thinking, cooperation, insofar as it includes something in the direction of altruism, is an evolutionary problem. Darwin recognized himself that individuals sacrificing themselves for the good of others was a problem for his theory. And the only species that are anywhere near as cooperative as humans are the eusocial insects, who all share incredible numbers of genes with one another. And Hamilton and others have explained that in terms of kin selection. So you can explain large cooperation with altruism in the case of kin selection, because on the level of the genes, it's not altruistic at all. I'm promoting my genes, even though I'm sacrificing my own individual organism. But in the case of humans, we have large-scale cooperation with strangers, with unrelated individuals. We trust them. We give our credit card number over the internet. We do all kinds of cooperative enterprises and institutions and large cooperations with differentiated roles, division of labor, and so forth and so on. And no other species does that with non-kin, anywhere near the extent that humans do. And certainly not any other non-human primates. We donate things to charity. We help old ladies across the street. We do altruistic, okay, I'm putting quotes around it for those of you who are skeptical. We'll come to that. We do altruistic things all the time for one another, and this is a bit of a puzzle from a strict Darwinian point of view. So let me just give you a kind of analogy about where I'm going to go with this in communication. So humans share information with one another freely, and they tell one another what's on their mind, and they give one another information that would be helpful to them. And so this is in that direction. This is in the direction of being altruistic, cooperative in the sense of altruistic. So here's an analogy. Of all the primates, and indeed of all the mammals, the only primates with very distinct whites around their eyes, sclera, whites around the eyes, are humans. You look at all the other primates, and I think all other mammals. I haven't scoured them all, but they've been systematic studies of the primates. So why do only humans have whites around the eyes? Now, if you give a kind of a loose kind of evolutionary explanation from like the 50s or 60s, well, it's good for the group, it's good for the species that everybody can follow everybody's gaze direction, and that's just sort of helpful. But starting with Dawkins and Krebs again, you've got to think about why is it good for the individual that you can follow my gaze? Okay, so if my eyes are white, then it's to my advantage that you follow my gaze. So that's the Darwinian way of thinking about it. So the answer is presumably that humans became more cooperative and helpful with one another, and therefore when you can follow my gaze more readily because you're not going to exploit me and you're not going to use it to my disadvantage. So I can afford to advertise the direction of my gaze because I'm among individuals who are not going to use that to my disadvantage. That's one possible explanation for why only humans have developed extremely visible eyes. And I want to make an analogy to communication. Humans advertise their thoughts and their desires and things they know that others don't know and things that are helpful to others, and we babble and we gossip and we talk all day long every day, and we're just telling what's on our mind all the time without worrying that others are going to use this to exploit us. Of course they do. Many times they do. But in general, we don't worry about that. So that's going to be the kind of analogy to human communication, that we freely give out this information and we don't worry about others exploiting us with it, even though on occasion they certainly will. Okay, so section 2.1 in the handout, I'm going to talk about, as all of you probably know, the dominant view of primate social cognitive evolution is Machiavellian intelligence. That is, primates developed many of their cognitive skills, not all of them, but many of their cognitive skills, most recently, especially perhaps, in social competition with group mates. I don't want to go against this at all, and in fact, I want to provide support for it. So I do believe that I'm going to stick with apes. Most of what I say sticks to monkeys too, applies to monkeys too, but we've done the research with apes and chimpanzees. So ape cognition is social cognition is mainly adapted for competition. Now, the early studies, of which we had several from our lab, showed that chimps didn't understand what others see, they didn't understand others' goals, and those kinds of things. And I have a book saying they don't do this, but that's the fun of science, is you can be wrong, and sure enough, we were wrong. And we've done several studies since then, and this is an hour talk by itself, but what I'm going to do here is show you an hour talk in one slide. That's a trick. Just show you there are a number of experiments, but the experiment that changed my mind most readily was this one, that all the experiments before where we had negative results about chimps not understanding what others see or understanding others' goals. Notice we're not talking about false belief here. I don't like the idea of theory of mind being one thing. There are lots of different things. And they were all about cooperation. So they were all about chimps knowing when I showed them something or reading my intentions when I'm trying to communicate with them. But what we did was we put them in competition with one another. And this experiment, these are the experiments of Hare et al. 2000 and Hare et al. 2001. They're on the handout in animal behavior. And the basic paradigm is we have a dominant and a subordinate. And the subordinate is over here, and the dominant is has a door just like this over here. And we have all kinds of conditions. The first paper has 5 studies, and the second one has 3. So there are all kinds of controls and stuff, and that's what if I had time, I would go into. But I'm just going to ask you to take it on faith today because it's background. And in this basic setup, there's one piece of food that both of them can see. So that the subordinate shouldn't be able to take that because the dominant will come grab it or beat her up or whatever. But there's also a piece of banana over here that the dominant can't see. So that piece should be safe. Now notice that what's going to happen is the door is going to go up for the subordinate before the dominant's door goes up. So it can't be that the subordinate waits to see what the dominant is doing and then reacts. She has to choose first. Okay? We have a control condition where this is the transparent barrier so the dominant can see it, and all kinds of tricky, cute things. We have things where we have the dominant, then we switch for another dominant. I just can't go into that today. So let me just show you the basic phenomenon here. So here comes the subordinate. The door is going to go down for a second and then up. Her door goes up first. and she chooses this one. Then here comes the dominant. Takes this one and then checks to make sure there's not some more over here. Okay. When you put them in competition, the subordinates know what the dominant can and can't see. We even have, again, we have a number of control conditions with a transparent barrier, with switch dominance. They know what particular individuals can see. We have a variation of it where there are two barriers, and now there's only going to be one piece of food. Here there are two pieces, and the one piece of food comes in like this, and it's hidden. Okay, and now, even though you can't see it now, you saw it hidden a minute ago. And I still stay away from it. So they know what the other one knows. Now, I would say knows in the sense of connaître, not savoir. In English, we have to use the same word, know. But they know that the other one has seen it. Okay, that the other one experienced it. Okay, so what I want to stress today is that we got this when we went to a competitive paradigm. They use their cognitive skills because they're competing all day, every day for food. When you're telling them where stuff is and you're trying to communicate with them and stuff, they don't get it because that's not what they do. They compete for food. Yesterday we talked about the Hare and Tomasello 2005 competitive object choice experiment where I reach for something and they know where the food is. Not if I point cooperatively, but if I reach for it competitively, they know where it is. So we think from these experiments, we've decided that apes understand that others see things. We have a recent paper in the volume edited by Susan Hurley that says chimpanzees understand what others see, not just what they're looking at. So, okay, we really mean see with content. They know what others see. They know what others' goals are, what state of the world they're trying to change, even if their behavior doesn't match that. And, of course, they know about actions. In a paradigm like this, if this was a rock instead of a banana, the dominant would know that the subordinate would know the dominant's not going. So change the goal, change it to something they don't want, and they would know. If the dominant can't see it, that's what the experiment is, then he won't go for it. The subordinate can figure. And if the door stayed closed, he wouldn't go for it. So they know that to do this, that the dominant has to want the banana, has to see the banana, and has to be able to act to go get it. And that in a cycle, that they understand the basic negative feedback loop or control system loop, that you have a goal and you act toward the goal and you act until you perceive that you've met your goal. So we think that chimps have a perception goal psychology. They know that others perceive things and have goals and that they act to make their perceptions match their goals. That's one way of talking about a control system. Okay, and they do this in competition. They do this trying to figure out what the other one's going to do next in a competitive situation. Human cognition, of course, humans had the same exact ancestry as chimps for however many tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years until the last 5 or 6. So humans have that same thing. We compete, we lie, we steal, we do all kinds of awful things to one another. But in addition, we have a cooperative overlay that operates in some domains under some conditions. And that's what I want to talk about today. Again, I want to make sure I emphasize that I don't think all you have to do is look around you and read the newspaper and you know that we're not that cooperative. But we do some cooperative things that other species don't do, and that's what I want to focus on, a rosy picture of the human condition. So human cognition, in addition, is adapted for cooperation and cultural life. So again, in cultural life, of course, we live together and share and trust one another and do all kinds of things every day out in the street that shows trust of one another and so forth. And that is species. That has for species, for primates at least, to an unprecedented degree. And following philosophers like Searle and Margaret Gilbert and Michael Bratman and Tomasello, we've taken up the notion of shared intentionality. So shared intentionality, it's a little bit of an artificial dichotomy, but I talk about different skills of shared intentionality and different motivations of shared intentionality. As again, it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, but skills is basically what Margaret Gilbert calls we intentionality. Searle calls it we intentionality as well. And that means that we have a shared goal that we're committed to. In addition, we include, that's in the action mode, we also include joint attention, which I've been studying for 20 years now. So shared attention is also shared intentionality. And it operates with some kind of mutual knowledge. I'm not going to go down the mutual knowledge hole. Many people have gone down there and never come out. I'm not going down there. I'm just going to say we know together, and I'm going to leave it as a primitive and leave it up to the philosophers to tell me what I mean by it later. But we intentionality, and we know together, we have a goal together, and we're committed to it together. Margaret Gilbert has a wonderful little paper called On Taking a Walk Together. And the idea is if you and I agree to take a walk together and we start walking and I just take off in a different direction or I just stop, you're not just surprised or you're upset because we were going to take a walk together. We're committed to do it together. In a sense, I promised to do it and now I'm reneging. So a joint commitment, a joint goal has more than just we're walking down the street together. She even says if you're walking down the street and somebody just happens to be walking beside you in the sidewalk and you're walking in tandem, you're not taking a walk together because you could stop and that other person wouldn't care. But if we're taking a walk together, I can't just stop without an excuse. So we have a joint commitment to a joint goal, shared attention. We not only are just looking at the same thing, I've argued this since 1995, we're not just looking at the same thing, but we know we see the same thing together. We're sharing attention. So shared intentionality is something new. It's not just understanding others as intentional agents. That's what I said in my 1999 book, and we've now revised that in our 2005 Behavioral and Brain Sciences paper, that sharing is something extra. You don't get it for free just because you understand others as intentional agents. You don't automatically share intentional states with them. You have to have something extra. And I'm going to demonstrate this for you in a couple of videos here. Okay, this is my favorite video. Anybody who's seen me give a talk in the last 5 years has already seen this one. I have two favorite videos, and they'll be both showed again. And my students keep telling me, please retire them, but I can't make myself do it. Okay, this is what I mean. This is a 24-month-old child. This is a silly little cooperative game. Now, the adult is programmed to be a little bit difficult. Notice the child points, and he puts it up here. Remember that for the pointing. Okay, now the adult is difficult, and the child tries a little bit to do it by himself. Okay, and now he's again trying to be a little bit difficult. Okay, and he doesn't just put it back on the trampoline, he puts it in the hand, right? Helping him to do it. And now, okay, I mean, so these are little games we made up or whatever. The trick is, again, that he's being difficult, and we want the experimental manipulation is he stops, and this was a pilot subject, and he was playing around. Now watch what he does now. Okay. So all right. So this is commitment. Okay. All right. So the child really wants to play this game. Really wants to play it together. Okay. All right. Here's the chimp's idea of this game. They've seen it one time. They've seen two human adults doing it. Both the children. Okay. Okay. This is Annette, and Annette is not so interested in this. Okay. She understands. Look, she understands the imperative. Sit here. Mm-hmm. Okay, ready? Set? Okay, no. All right, all right. So there is absolutely nothing difficult about this. The chimp is perfectly capable of doing this. The chimp is perfectly capable of doing that thing in there. My gloss is the chimp basically thinks this is a stupid game. That's what the chimp thinks, okay? But I would submit to you that basically every species on the planet thinks this is a stupid game except one, and that's the 2-year-old human child, all right? So this is a social game whose only point is to do it together. If you go back and you look at the child again, there's all kinds of monitoring and smiling at one another. Okay. In addition, here's another one. This child is now 18 months, so either just barely linguistic, and in this case, this is now a real experimental trial. The other one was from a pilot subject, but this one he's actually very doing it. And then he's going to do this for a while, and then he's just going to stop. And you'll see what the child does. 18 months means just a little bit of language, maybe a handful of words, depending on the child. Some children don't have any productive language at this age. So the child is coordinating, kind of teasing. And now he's going to stop. If you want to watch him stop, you can see him here, but actually it's better to watch the child. Okay? The child's ready to go. The adult's not doing his part. Come on. And there's a point. And the adult's programmed for 15 seconds. And the kid's even going to disengage and go get him and drag him over. Okay, and now, okay, he's going to do it. Okay, when the chimps, when we do that kind of an interruption with the chimps, they don't care. So now this is a different task. This is one where he's got to pull up this plexiglass panel, in which case that allows her to reach through and get food, which she'll then share with him. So he needs to pull this up. And then when she stops, you watch what the chimp does lots of clever things, but the question is, does the chimp try to re-engage her in the game? So she's stopped now. That's not exactly what a child would do, but okay. Now watch. She kind of pushes the human out of the way to try to do it herself. Okay, the 15 seconds is up now, and she's ready to go. So she's now signaled that she's really ready to go, and he lifts it up because he knows what to do. But he's not trying to re-engage her. So basically, the sort of social games, the chimps aren't interested in at all, and the instrumental tasks, when the other guy stops, they don't try to re-engage. Some of this requires helping. So all right. So these are skills of. Okay, let me show you one other thing. This one is. I'm sorry about this video, but this is at another place. This is not our primate facility. And there's a thing here that they pull in together. But I just want to show you this one thing. This was from our recent science paper. And what you're going to see is, this is the end of it. This guy over here is going to go let this guy in. So he needs a cooperative partner. He knows that. He goes and opens the door and lets the other guy in. But I'm showing you this for a different reason. I'm showing you to show you that they don't communicate with one another when they. So he's going to get him. He's going to let him in. And they don't communicate with other. He's looking back for him. He's looking back to see if he's coming. He's waiting for him, but then they don't communicate. All right? And when children do this kind of thing, they monitor one another and tell one another to do things and so forth. Part of this as well in terms of motivation is also helping. And so the shared intentionality I was just talking about is cooperative activities. We have a shared goal. We have a shared commitment to the goal. If I stop, you try to re-engage me. Those of you who are thinking about the interpretation of that, the basic line that we talk about is social tool explanation. I need you there to make this happen, versus the sharing one where I want you there to share it with me and have a shared goal. Now, motivation in terms of helping, this was also a science paper that we had in the same issue. These are 18-month-old children. We now have 14-month-olds. And the idea here is, we called it altruistic helping because the child's getting nothing out of it. So here, he drops his spoon down there. The child has played with this by himself, 18-month-old. Now watch, he's going to get it, and he'll even look up sort of first and hand it right to him, okay? And he wants to put it in the cup, and he pops it down again. Okay, so very simple behavior, but basically the idea is there's nothing in it for the child. And they do this spontaneously. So here he is again. It's doing what it did yesterday. This is what it did yesterday, and then at the end it came in and was fine. Yeah, I don't know what. Let me try it in another mode here. There, okay, you just watch it in this mode. Okay, so he's hanging clothes. He drops the clothespin, and you can see how young this child is. This is a big effort for this little kid. And he's no reinforcement. He's not being asked. The adult doesn't monitor him, doesn't look at him, doesn't communicate to him, just drops it and reaches. And again, the child looks up first and hands it to him. So these are quite spontaneous altruistic acts. Now, of course, we have people who say this is altruistic because it's not costly. Well, okay, it's not hugely costly, but, you know, that kid put a little effort into that. Okay, so, okay, and now, let's see. I thought I had one more here. All right, so I got one more. This is my other one I show all the time. No, sorry. This is the chimp helping. Sorry about that. I did that too quickly. It didn't have a label on it. Okay, so this is we found the chimps, the human-raised chimps, doing a little bit of this as well. Sorry. This happens quickly, but she reaches for it, and the chimp pushes it over to her. Okay, so these little altruistic acts are very uncostly. You're not putting a lot of effort into them or whatever, but still spontaneously being helpful. Now, one other domain here. If you look on the handout, I've got cooperation, and I'm just going to mention social learning very quickly. We've done some things on social learning now, and I just want to bring this up because one of the key things is humans having norms. So we have norms of cooperation. You're supposed to help. You're supposed to do this stuff together. And we just showed some kids. This child is 2.5, and we just 2 3/4, and we just showed him how to do something here. And I don't know how well you'll be able to hear this, but and it's German anyway, so it doesn't matter. But she's showing him how to do it. And the child says, nix, nix, nix. Okay? Don't do it like that. And he's not doing it the right way. And this child, just having seen somebody do it one time, is already saying, no, don't do it like that. No. And I says, do it like this. Take it. You have to take this. Here, bitte. Okay? Okay, so the idea here is that one other element we're going to need in this that has been emphasized by Ernst Fair and his group and people like Gachter and those people is that humans also have social norms about doing things the way other people do them in this case, but also norms about being nice and cooperating when you ought to cooperate. And we're going to need norms here before this is all over. So I just wanted to show you that these kids, about 2.5 or so, already are. This is in the direction of what Boyd and Richardson have called third-party punishment, because what the child does is the child sees somebody do it one way, then a third party does it the wrong way. The child has no investment, and the child is saying, no, no, don't do it like that. That's not the way we do it. That's not the way it's done. So there's a normative judgment outside, not just I do it the way everybody else does it, but I make judgments on other people and tell them to do it the way they're supposed to do it. Right? And those norms are going to be important in what we talk about here as well. Okay, so it took a little bit too long there, but in any case, that's the background, that humans have this sort of shared intentionality. They're inordinately cooperative activities together, helping one another, and so forth. Okay, now let's talk about pointing. I told you yesterday we talk a lot about pointing. Let's talk about human communication, and I want to talk about pointing. And the first point is that by itself, pointing is nothing. That is to say, if I go, what do I mean? Well, you have no idea what I mean, because by itself, it doesn't do anything. Pointing takes its meaning from, I will argue, some shared context, and it has to be shared, some shared context that gives it its meaning. So if you look at table 1A, that's on page 11, there are a bunch of examples of humans pointing. And I'm just going to skip through some of them here. At the list, I have the things that are quite, up at the top, I have things that are quite common. It's over there, you drop that, look at that, could I have that, put it here. These are all, again, things without, mainly without language. But look at things like, so a person in the airplane, I made these observations over a couple of month period, a lot of them in the airplane, I guess, because you get bored in the airplane, I guess, and there's kind of background noise or whatever. But in the airplane, one person, they're looking for 2 seats together, and a person points, basically meaning here are 2 seats together, points to somebody down the aisle. Down there a little bit, in an airplane, I'm standing up near the bathroom, and somebody comes and they look at me and they point to the bathroom with a kind of a quizzical expression. And I took it to mean correctly, are you waiting in line for the bathroom? Because I was standing near the bathroom. So you have to know about airplanes, you have to know about the bathrooms, and the people sometimes are standing in line for them, sometimes they're standing up and stretching. The reason he asked, the reason he didn't assume I was standing in line is because he knows that sometimes people stand up and stretch. And okay, and he has the quizzical expression. I think this is important because in the communicative act, you have to have some reference, so the reference is to the bathroom door, and some expression of motive. When I say, give me that, I have a kind of a stern expression, give it to me, or he goes questioning, like, are you in line? And so the expression of motive is also a part of it. There's one, a very simple one, somebody standing in line, not paying attention, the guy behind them goes, and kind of insistent and annoyed, like, move up, come on, So, and it gives a certain expression. So what I say here on the handout is that all of these, and I invite you, if you're interested at all in pointing, to look these over, because the meanings are just as broad as human social interaction in general. Pointing can mean anything in the right context. It means move up in line. It means are you waiting in line for the thing? It means can I give you another drink? It means should I put your name on the list? It means another one of my favorite ones was I had a student that I had given a book. I gave her a book. I said, here, this is a gift for you, a book. And she thinks, why are you giving me a book? You know, like she thought, I know you're nice, but that's kind of, you know. And then I actually had been given a stack of 5 of them, you know, and so I pointed over to the stack without saying anything. I just pointed, and she saw the 5, and she went, oh, I see. Okay, you got a bunch of them. You need to get rid of them. Okay. So now the world makes sense again. Okay. All right, so, okay, so the pointing can mean anything. Somebody told me at the reception last night, he said it was a true story, not a joke, that they go to China and they go into a restaurant and there's a dog in the restaurant and he calls the waiter over and points to the dog, meaning take the dog out of the restaurant. But it turns out the waiter took it to mean that's what I want for dinner. Because in the different cultures in China, they have dogs, they eat dogs. And so it was a completely different, so they had 2 different frames. So we're calling this the joint attentional frame. And for successful communication, you need some kind of joint attentional frame or what Herb Clark calls common ground. And so basically if you have no frame, you have no meaning. Now, so when I go like this, it has no meaning. Now, there are cases, and these are interesting cases to distinguish, and I think Sperber and Wilson have some in their book. So I think one of them, and I'm not sure if it's from your book or from somewhere else, but there's a child on the playground crying and looks around and can't find mom, and I'm an adult sitting on a bench, and I point over to mom, and the child sees mom and runs over there. Is that your example? I didn't think so. Okay. So in a case like that, all the child has to do is follow your point and see mom, and everything's fine. But in the case where you need an inference, then it's not fine. So if mom was, for example, behind a tree, and I pointed, and the child looked over, and you just see the tree, so the child would have to say, oh, well, you know, he must be pointing for a reason. It must be related to me crying somehow, and would have to make the inference that he's trying to point out mom. So this is apropos of the example of chimps, that if you point to food and they see the food, they'll go get the food. So in one sense, they know what you mean by the point, but not really mean. What they do is they follow your gaze, they see something that they want, and they go get it. But if you point over there and there's a bucket, even if they're searching for food, and you point over there and there's a bucket, they don't go get it, because now when they look over, they just see the bucket. So, but to make the relevance inference, they need to know that this is for me, that you're communicating to me, and that there's some shared frame that gives it the meaning. And these have to be shared. So let me just give you an example. Go back to this experiment again. So if you and I we're playing a game where you're the child and you're searching for this toy, and we both know that you're searching for the toy, and I point to the bucket, children from 12 to 14 months will go find the toy in the bucket, unlike chimps. But of course, I could point to the bucket. Let's say you and I know that you have some hobby of using a certain kind of plastic in some kind of art you do, and I walk by and I point to the bucket, then I mean there's some of that kind of plastic that you like. And that has to be shared. Herb Clark has showed this a lot in these mutual knowledge kinds of things with about the Marx Brothers movie and the day at the races and all that. But I can say it much simpler. So let's just say that you have a particular fetish for this kind of plastic, okay? But I don't know that. So if I pointed to the bucket made out of this plastic, you'd say, well, there's that plastic that I really love, but he doesn't know that. Right? He doesn't know about my fetish for this plastic, so he can't mean the plastic. Right? And you can keep doing this, you can iterate this up into the clouds, right? So we can have it where I spy on you. This is very much like the Clark and Marshall paper. I spy on you, and so I see that indeed you have this fetish for this plastic, but you don't know that I was spying on you. So now I point to the bucket, and I know you like the plastic, and of course you know that. I know you like the plastic, but you don't know that I know. And because you don't know that I know, then your inference is, well, he's pointing to that bucket, but you still think he doesn't know that I like that plastic. So that's that. So the frame, the joint attentional frame, the shared context, indeed has to be mutually known. It has to be mutually manifest. It has to be in the public space where we both know it, and we both know that we know it. All right, and so that context, it's not just that pointing takes its meaning from the context. As we all know, context is a very ambiguous term, but that it comes from a shared, we're calling it joint attentional frame. So the frame allows you, in essence, to give kind of perspectival, I don't know if that's too strong, but when I can point to bucket qua location. If you're searching for something, I can point to bucket qua material, if that's material you like. I can point to bucket qua bucket, if you like buckets for some reason. And this is something that when I sort of figured this out by looking at all these examples, I said, that's the kind of thing that I thought only language could do before. I thought one of the things that language did beyond pointing was because you have these choices. I can call it a dog or an animal or a pet or whatever, that language gives you these paradigmatic choices, and you can't do that with pointing, because in pointing all you can do is point to it. But actually, the point itself just directs you to that location, but the meaning of the communicative act expressed in the pointing actually can give you perspectival, it can give you different things. It can give you things under different descriptions because of the sharedness. So that was one of the things I alluded to yesterday, as you actually can get closer to language with pointing than one might imagine. Another thing about language is that everybody has talked about for a long time, and I think it's true, but I want to encroach on it just a little bit, and that's clearly one of the things that's important about language is being able to make reference to absent reference. Talk about things from the past or things that are things that are displaced in time or space. But we have a number of examples, and you'll see them tomorrow or Thursday with children's pointing, and there are a number with adults where you point to missing things. So, for example, if one that we had was the child is every day the child goes outside and always has a belt on. Sorry, I have the missing belt today. And mom just points to the missing belt. The child looks down, and goes and gets the belt. Right? Now, if you to be able to indicate an absent referent, you have to have a very tight context. So we have to know that normally the belt is there. The belt's there every day. I've reminded you about the belt. So now when I look down and see no belt, I automatically know what you mean because of the shared context. You can't just point, I can't point at the absence of a bucket on that chair, right? I mean, unless every single day the bucket's there, and now I point and I show you, then you know that I'm indicating the absence of the bucket. So you can indicate absent reference in where you have enough of a shared context. So you can imagine two early humans where if every single day we go to this watering hole and sometimes there are antelopes there and sometimes there are not antelopes there, and today I return from the direction of that watering hole and I go like this, one can imagine inferring that there are antelopes over there today because of the shared context. Okay, so pointing by itself is nothing, but the communicative acts that humans do with pointing can indicate something in the direction of perspectival angles on things and can also indicate absent reference. Now, some people might think, well, this is modern humans who already have a language pointing, and so it's probably the influence of language on their pointing behavior. But I'm going to show you tomorrow that pre-linguistic children, 12 and 13-month-olds, point to absent reference, and they point to things under different perspectives, given the right context. Pre-linguistic. So this is not a secondary effect of language, in my opinion. I wouldn't say we've closed down the case, but I think that's not what's going on here. Okay, so then let's talk about what has to go into an act of pointing. And what I have here for the rest of page 7, which says the communicative act has 3 levels of intentions, and then the little pictures of the heads down at the bottom, those all correspond to figure 1, which is on the back. And I'm going to say a little bit about each of them. Now, you'll see how indebted I am to Sperber and Wilson for this kind of analysis, but I do some things a little differently, and some things I translate into a different language. I'm saying the same thing but with a different language because I'm trying to do it in a coherent psychological vocabulary, thoroughly psychological vocabulary, and I'm trying to get everything in one sort of account of basically intentional action, that the communicator is trying to get something done, and they're trying to get it done by means of communication. So what we have here then is there's a social intention, and you can call that the motive, the reason why I'm pointing. It's in the direction of what people have to talk about speech acts. But my social intention, I have different social intentions. So I might have a request that you do something to help me. So can you give me that? And so I would just point, because I point to the salt at the dinner table. I don't have to say anything. I point to the salt, and you give me the salt. Okay, I can be informative. So you drop your wallet in line. I point to your wallet. I don't have to say anything. You see your wallet, you pick it up. So in that case, I'm helping you. So I'm either asking you for help, or I'm helping you. Or I'm just sharing. So we're walking down the street, and we see some famous sports star or something. So Sedan walks by, and I go, you know, all right, and I'm just sharing with you. Look, there's this interesting guy. I'm assuming you know him too. By the way, the sharedness can be cultural sharedness. It doesn't need to be our personal experience, because I assume you know who he is, probably better than me. And so it's what Herb Clark talks about as cultural common ground, not individual common ground. Okay, and then there are also other kinds of motives as well, things like greeting and expressing gratitude, etc. I'm not going to get into that right now, because I think I won't make it through if I do. So I have different social goals, social intentions, or motives for communicating. I want to help you. I want you to help me. I want to inform you of something. I want to share something with you or express. Then we have the communicative intention, which, of course, was singled out first by Grice, and then I think Sperber and Wilson have done the most interesting job with it since then, that we know together, this is putting it in the public space, that we know together that I'm attempting to communicate, so that you'll attend to the referential act, so that you'll attend to what I want you to attend to, and thereby seek relevance or infer my social intention. Now, this is different than the way that Dan and Dedry do it, for sure, because they're talking mainly about information, that I want you to know what my assumptions are and so forth, and they're just going on the level of information and understanding the message. And I want to go beyond that to the Speech Act goal, because what I really want is I want you not only to know what I'm referring to, but I want you also to know what I want out of you, that I want you to know something, that I want you to do something, that I want you to feel something. And so you're going to attend to, and now you get down to the referential act, you're going to attend to the chair, because I want you to attend to the chair. You're going to attend to my expression of attitude, like, you know, maybe it's a questioning thing about the chair, all right? And in the joint frame, you know this is for you. You know that I want you, that I'm trying to communicate with you, that it's mutually manifest that I'm communicating with you. I want you to attend to the chair, and my expression of attitude here, or my expression of motive, and ultimately, I want you to figure out what I want out of you. I want you to do something. Maybe do means even maybe just know. I want you to know something, or I want you to help me with something, or I want to help you with something that I assume you need to know. So if you look at figure 1, then I have a lot of individual goals way up at the top. So I may be trying to inform you that I may be trying to inform Elizabeth that I want this chair to be moved over here so I can put my computer on it or something. And if we have enough background knowledge, I can go to her like this, okay? Now, I may be doing that for all kinds of reasons. I may have individual goals about wanting to exploit females, or I may want to deceive her about something, or I may have all kinds of individual goals. Not worried about those right now, but my social goal is to get her to move this chair over to here. And my communicative goal is to get her to understand that I want that. And so I want her to look at the chair as I refer her to it with a point. I want her to look at my expression, which says something about that, and her to know that because I'm trying to communicate, then I want her to make the inference about why is this relevant to our social interaction. And the social interaction is I want you to do something. And so you have to make that inference. So if you look at figure 1, we've got the individual goals, which I'll basically sort of ignore for the moment. The social intention is for you to do something, for you to know something, for you to feel something. The communicative intention is that we know together. I want us to know together what my social goal is, what I want out of you. And I want to get there by referring you to this thing and referring you to my expression while I'm doing it. And so then the common ground is this shaded area. And the common ground, what is the communicative act, and this is something that I think Sperber and Wilson are really good on, is that the communicative act itself goes into the common ground. It's perceptually co-present that I'm pointing. It's perceptually co-present that I just said something. And it goes into the common ground. It's mutually manifest that I've just tried to communicate with you. And so as you can see in the gray area here, We also have, up at the top, it says common ground, joint attentional frame. We know together, and we know together all kinds of things. We know together all kinds of things as individuals. Elizabeth and I know what we just were doing in the office trying to get the handout together, and none of you guys know that, so I would have some shared frames with Elizabeth that I don't have with other people. But we're all members of Western culture, so if I mention Jacques Chirac, even though you and I have never Chirac, I assume that we can use him as common ground because as members of the culture we know that. So we have all kinds of things in the common ground that are there. But then in addition, we have the actual communicative act being put into the public space, being put into the common ground. So I have for you signals, so I'm going, I'm indicating this is for you. In addition, I'm actually doing the point, and I'm making some kind of expression that's telling you, kind of questioning or something like that, which is a further hint about what I want out of you. And then I won't really go into the comprehension side of it, but the comprehender has to, first of all, identify the referent in some way, influenced by the joint attentional frame or common ground, infer relevance to the common ground, comprehend the message, and then decide whether to agree to it or not, to do what to do or not. So one of the things that's different about this account is what has been called speech acts, and when people have focused on language, as I read through the relevance book again before a few weeks ago, is that when you use language examples a lot, the speech act stuff is encoded in the constructions, and there's speech act verbs, and they're all kind of complicating stuff. If you get down to pointing, which by itself is nothing, so the pointing doesn't contribute anything other than directing your attention in a direction, then you can sort of, I think this other stuff sort of falls out a little more clearly the way it relates. And so what people have talked about as a speech act is actually, I'm calling it here a social goal, because obviously since I'm not speaking, we're talking about pointing, we're not talking about language. I don't want to call it a speech act. I could, but I prefer not to. So I'm saying I have a social goal, or social intention, sorry, and the social intention is what I want you to do. And again, do very broadly. So I want you to know something. I want you to do something physically to help me. I want you to share some feeling with me. So I want, and when you're comprehending, you're trying to say, why is he doing that? What does he want out of me? I could walk into your office and say, I'll just use a language example. I could walk into your office and say, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. And you'd comprehend that perfectly well. And you'd know it was an indicative speech act, and I was informing you of something, but you'd want to know, okay, why? What do you want out of me? What do you want me to do? I've got the message now. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain, but what do you want me to? Okay, and then, but if we've had some past interaction that talking about going to a special holiday somewhere or whatever, then you might automatically, oh, I see what you mean. You want me to think about doing that as a holiday with you or whatever. Okay, so this is all much too fast, and I apologize for that. But we have a lot of time for discussion. I'm just trying to come up with an account that I think, if you focus on something like pointing or also characterizing gestures, which are another thing, and I have some examples in the table as well, where I try to get you to do something with a gesture. So here, I'll give you the characterizing gesture, again, to show you that it needs a frame, I think. So here's the gesture that's, if you haven't looked at the handout here, number one in the handout is this. Anybody know what that might mean? Okay, I was in an Italian cheese shop, and I wanted Parmigiano, and he says, blah, 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 blah. And I figured he must mean, do I want it hard or grated? And so I went like this for grated cheese, okay? And he knew what I meant immediately, and he did the grated cheese, okay? So again, even the characterizing gesture, it has a little more information than just directing you to a location, perhaps, depending on how you think about it, but it still needs the frame around it, the shared context, to give it meaning as well. So, so what I'm trying to do with this figure is to give an account in terms of the communicator's goals in the situation, why the communicator is communicating, and how they're trying, and that the assumption is they're always trying to get the listener, they're communicating for a reason. They want the communicator to do something, at the very least, to know something. And it does this with these different layers of intentions. So, and they operate together in concert in a communicative act. Now, what I won't do for purposes of time, and I said this yesterday, the reason I had a handout is because I already knew that I wouldn't get through everything, and that way I can have it. You can have it on the handout, and while I don't get to it. So on page 8 of the handout, what I tried to do is go through a little bit of what I call primitives, and I know some people don't like conceptual primitives, and I understand that, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to think about children. Can children really do these things, and do they really have the full conceptual structure? And that's what I'll talk about tomorrow. So I won't get into that today, but I think that the basic schema, which is about 4 lines down on page 8, the basic schema is going to be something like, I want that we know together that I want you to do something. All right? And that's the basic Gricean, if you will, or the Sperber and Wilson kind of thing where I want us to know together that I want something out of you. That's the reflexive schema, if you will. And I'm going to argue to you tomorrow that from their earliest pointing and pre-linguistic communication, infants already have something like this schema. And the primitive elements of wanting, I want, we know, etc., that you do something, I'm going to argue that there's independent research, experimental research, demonstrating that they understand each of these things, with the possible exception of we. Okay? And it's not absolutely clear they understand we in any sense, but we're going to leave that. We're going to that's why I have that one highlighted in gray, because it's not clear about that. But in any case, some aspect of that. Okay, and then the primitives of these different things, I want you to help me, or I want to help you, or I want that we do something together. Okay, let's return now briefly to the apes in the object choice. So if you'll recall from yesterday, again, I just want to emphasize this one last time. In the object choice, I point to where the food is, the chimp doesn't know where it is, and when I reach for it, the chimp makes the inference. So I would say then, if you look then down at the second half of page 8 there, what they don't have is they don't have the joint attentional frame for reference. So the child and the adult are playing this finding game together. There's a warm-up phase where I hide the toy and the child's looking for it, and I help her find it by showing it to her. We do this with the chimps as well. So we know that we're playing a finding game together. Your role is find it. My role is help you find it or show you where it is, and I've done that this way. All right, the child has that frame. So now, on a new trial, I just point, and the child knows this has to be relevant to this shared game. Chimp doesn't have that game. No matter what we try to do with pre-warm-up and all that, the chimp doesn't have the idea that we are engaged in this together in a cooperative activity where your goal is to find it, and your role is to find it, and my role is to help you find it or to show you where it is. So they don't have the joint attentional frame. I don't believe they understand anything about the communicative intention, the we intention, that I want us to know together that. I don't think that chimps have dealing with that. And I don't think they understand the motive of helping by informing. As I told you yesterday, I don't think they understand that I'm telling you where it is. Altruistically, I'm informing you where it is. So, so these are all elements not of them not understanding intentionality, but of them not understanding shared intentionality. They're not understanding the joint attentional frame. They're not understanding the communicative we, I want us to know, and they're not understanding the helpful motive. So that's the end of the comparison of the chimps, is that it's the shared intentionality. It's precisely the shared intentionality components that they're missing. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about an evolutionary fairy tale. I'm not big on evolutionary fairy tales. The ratio of speculation to data, it just makes me a little nervous. But I'm going to do a little bit anyway. And I don't really need to talk too much about the early stuff, so I'm going to sort of skip through to where it says Homo sapiens shared intentionality. And think about communication in particular. So whenever I talk about the shared intentionality, people want to know, okay, how did it evolve in humans? What were the conditions? What were the evolution? And I don't know. I have no idea what it was. But one part of it, I would think, would be mutualistic kind of activities where collaborating together is to our mutual benefit. Obviously, cooperative hunting would be A case in point, or if we're gathering berries together, I hold down the branch and you pick the berries and we share them at the end. Or cooperative child care somehow, that I keep your child and you keep my child, or we together we keep our two children and we keep them hemmed into a safe place or whatever. And so one can imagine all kinds of scenarios. One can imagine ecological conditions where cooperating would be especially important, but we don't really have any evidence for what those were. So that's where I can't quite make myself go, is to make up a story without much information on the specifics. But what I do want to say is that in modern accounts, modern evolutionary accounts of where cooperation in the sense of altruism, that is cooperation in the sense where I sacrifice a bit, come from, the kin selection works fine, but it doesn't help in the human case of large-scale cooperation. Reciprocity, that is reciprocal altruism, was the first proposal for how this was going to happen by Trivers, talking about I'll do something for you, and then later you'll do something for me, and it'll all balance out. But it turns out that hasn't worked out very well. They're not any great examples of it in the animal world, and it doesn't work very well in large groups where you have to, where you're interacting with each individual only infrequently. But so what the people have come up with more recently is so-called indirect reciprocity, which is based on reputation, and that is that I help you not only, but I'm not looking for help from you back, but I'm looking to increase my reputation for being a helpful person so that in the future other people will want to interact with me and do nice things for me because they know that I'll be nice to them back because they've observed me being nice either spontaneously or in return. So indirect reciprocity has played a big role in that kind of, in explaining the evolution of those kinds of things. And also even possibly strong reciprocity. And strong reciprocity, which is very controversial, it may depend on group selection, and so it makes it extra controversial, is saying that humans evolved just to be nice straight away, to do something helpful straight away, if it's not too costly, of course, do something helpful straight away and not worry about whether you're going to get paid back or not. And that if you had a group of people who did that kind of thing, in a group selectionist kind of thing, you could make that work. I don't need all those details. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a flavor for the kind of argument you need to make to justify altruistic actions that have a genetic or biological component in the modern evolutionary framework. Now, if we get to cooperative communication, then what I would want to argue is that you have to look at each of the different social intentions separately. Okay, you have to look at and if you go back to yesterday where we're talking about the communicator and the audience have separate interests, you have to then look to see the communicator and the audience's interests in each of the different kinds of social intentions. So what I've done is just a little bit of something in that direction. So under cooperative communication on page 9 there, we can talk about the general human version of cooperative communication is making public your desires and knowledge in cooperative communication. And the relevance is based on the assumption of helpfulness. That was something I sort of skipped over in these back here in the last page, but that the relevance assumption, I think, requires, in addition to all the things that Dan has laid out about in terms of information processing and how hard it is to get to that piece of information or whatever. In addition, I think if I'm going to assume that Elizabeth pointing to the chair is relevant for me, part of that is based on me assuming that she's trying to be helpful to me in some way, or else trying to get help for herself from me. So we're making public these desires and knowledge, and I think that what you get is that in imperatives where I'm asking why, if I ask Elizabeth to bring me that chair, why should she do that? What's in it for her, as it were, from an evolutionary point of view? And that's where indirect reciprocity and reputation come in. And it's, I think, part of the explanation, or part of the explanation for this public making mutually manifest, putting out in the public domain my request, because I'm making public the request that she bring me the chair, and it's obvious to her that I've made this request. Anyone who's watching, it's in the public domain that I've made the request. So it's in her interest to respond to it to the degree that it will enhance her reputation for being a nice person and being cooperative. To my knowledge, and Maurice can maybe help with this, but I think in every culture that I've read about or know about, some kind of thanking or gratitude, some public expression of gratitude is part of everyday social life. And so another part of it is I ask her to do this favor in the public domain. She does the favor in the public domain with a reputation, and then I thank her. And I'm thanking her because I'm putting out in the public domain my the fact that she did this nice thing for me. So I'm advertising her niceness. I'm advertising how nice she is. Thank you, and everybody's supposed to hear her, how nice she is. So, and in addition, that does for me that now you know that if you do something nice for me, your niceness will be advertised. That's because I am a grateful person, and I thank you for it. So, just like we got back to the anglerfish and the prey fish yesterday, if you think about why people fulfill requests, one of the reasons is probably something like indirect reciprocity and building a reputation for being nice, and gratitude and public display is part of that, and I think helps explain why people do that from an evolutionary point of view. And I know some of you who don't study evolution or think about evolution, you're thinking, this is crazy. You know, why do I have to have that kind of basis for just getting somebody a chair? Well, the reason is because no other species really does this the same way. Okay? Chimps don't request other ones. They don't ask favors of other chimps, and the other chimp sort of cheerfully does the favor, and the first chimp says thank you. Okay? That just doesn't happen. Even if you say children are helpful, these little 18-month-olds are helpful because their parents have rewarded them for being helpful, the question is, why are their parents, if you step back from the point of view of the species and evolution as a whole, why are human parents encouraging their children to be altruistic, and why are kids responding to it? Chimp parents aren't encouraging their children to be nice and do nice favors for people and to be altruistic. So even if you want to say that it's coming from there, you have to explain the species. Okay, so imperatives, where I'm requesting something, has these indirect reciprocity issues that I think explain the imperative social intention and why people respond to it. The informative intention, social intention, is where I sort of advertise my helpfulness by telling Elizabeth something that's helpful to her. So I give her some information that she would like to know, that I think she might find interesting, and that, or that helps her in some way. I tell her she dropped her wallet, or I tell her there's a Marx Brothers movie on at the theater because I know she likes Marx Brothers. So I'm telling her things that I think she'll be interested, or I'm telling her some piece of gossip that I know that she'll enjoy. So I'm somehow informing her of things, sharing information with her that I think either it will benefit her or will please her or will do something that's for her benefit. And again, putting it in the public space shows that, makes it available. Even if it's just the two of us in the room, I'm making it public, and we both know together and we've acknowledged together that I've done this thing. And so that now puts it in the direction of social norms on helpfulness and public obligations. So here, this is why I wanted to just mention the norms before. We have only, let me do a little bit of a sidelight on norms here. Humans have norms. All cultures have norms. The different cultures have different norms, but all cultures have norms for various activities. I had an anthropology friend who had a biologist friend who said to him, norms, what is that? You know, from a biological evolutionary point of view, it just doesn't, said, tell me something about norms that would be meaningful biologically. And my anthropologist friend thought about it and came back and said, what are the two most important things to a biologist, an evolutionarist? Sex and food, right? That's what biologists really think about when they think about evolution, behavioral ecology. So he said, let's look at all these different societies that I know about. There are incredible numbers of norms on who you can have sex with, who you can marry, who you can, and every culture we know about, there are taboos against having sex with your sister, and you can't have sex with somebody else's wife, and you can't have sex in public, and all kinds of things about mating and all kinds of social norms on mating, and if you break them, you feel shamed, you feel guilty, you feel whatever, okay? So we have social norms on sex, we have social norms on food. This anthropologist studied hunter-gatherer groups that, the males would go out and kill a large game, and there were all kinds of norms about how you had to share the food when you had more than you could eat yourself at the moment, all kinds of norms about sharing the food. There are all kinds of norms about who can do what on which piece of land and space. So we have social norms that aren't just to be nice or whatever like this. We have social norms on biologically fundamentally important things like food and sex. And in addition, we have biological norms on lots of other things. We have social norms on lots of other things as well. And we have social norms on being helpful. So, if we think about two levels here, one is the level that I'm communicating with you, and the other one is the social intention, what I want you to do. Right. If I say to Elizabeth, Elizabeth, could you bring me that chair? If she just absolutely ignores me and doesn't even act like she heard me, and I say, hey, could you get me that chair, please? Okay. If you ignore the communication and you ignore it enough, you're basically going to be classified as mentally ill. All right? You're not a normal person if you don't at least engage. She has to say, be quiet, I'm busy, or I don't want to do anything for you now, or whatever. It's fine, you can make excuses, but you can't ignore it. You have an obligation to engage with the communication. I don't know if one-year-olds feel this obligation, but adults certainly have the obligation to engage. In addition, if I ask you for a favor that's a very small favor, that's no cost to you, so if I say, could you hand me that pen, please? You can't say, no. You can't just say no, okay? If it's an absolutely no-cost favor, there's a norm that says you have to, you can give an excuse, you can say my arm's tired, or that's my favorite pen and I'd really rather not loan it out, or you can make excuses, but you can't just say no without incurring a huge social cost about, oh, you know, did you see what she did? My God, she just said no. You know, he was our guest, and she just said no. You can't borrow my pen. You know, and so we gossip and whatever, and we ruin her reputation from this one act. Sorry. Okay, this is made up now. Okay. Okay. So we have social norms governing the communicative act. You have to engage with me communicatively, and you have to deal with my request. And if I do something nice for you, like I tell you you dropped your wallet or whatever, normally you would pick it up and say thank you, or you would pick up or you would look at it and you say, oh, that was my old one, I didn't want it anyway. So you're giving me an excuse about why you didn't pick it up, why you didn't take advantage of why you didn't use this useful information that I was giving you and use it to your benefit like I wanted you to. And of course, there's this more where I just tell you gossipy stuff where you don't have to, there are sort of less obligations there. But in any case, for these where I'm asking you for help or I'm offering you useful or helpful stuff, there are norms that are governing this. So, so what I want to argue is that communication, human cooperative communication, relies on these shared intentionality things with these helping and sharing motives, and they end up forming norms in the same way that you get norms in other domains of human interaction. And part of where that comes from, and part of what I think explains, it's part of the explanation for communicative intentions as being publicly displayed things of saying, I'm attempting to communicate with you. I want you to acknowledge that I'm attempting to communicate with you, because once I've done it and you've acknowledged it, then it's in the public space and it's in the domain of reputation. So now whatever happens, once we've got it out there, then whatever happens from there on has implications for your reputation. Notice again that it has to be shared. So we were using an example in the lab of the following, that let's say that it has to be acknowledged and shared. So let's say that this is the example we were using in our lab. I'm sitting at my desk and I'm talking to somebody else, and my colleague is standing in the doorway, but I don't know she's there. And I say, boy, I sure wish Melinda would write the discussion to this paper. Okay. Now, if I look up and she's there and we acknowledge that she heard this, okay, then she has to deal with it, right? She has to deal with it because we both know that I want her to write the discussion, and we know it publicly. Right? But if she can slip out before I noticed her, she hears me say it, then we both know that I want her to write the discussion, but we didn't publicly acknowledge it. We don't know it together. Right? So she heard that, but got out of the way, and it's not publicly acknowledged, and so now there's no norm on it. Now she doesn't have to do it. She might feel personally like she ought to or guilty or something, but it's not the same as when it's acknowledged publicly. Then you have to deal with it one way or the other. Another example, so that's on the level of the favor. That's on the level of the social intention, doing what I want you to do. On the level of the communicative act, a very interesting example happened to me in the hallway in our office the other day. So I'm talking to somebody in a very engaging way. We're really talking about something deep and important, and one of the secretaries, the secretary is coming, and I see her all day, every day. We're very friendly and all that sort of thing. And she's walking down the hall, and the way I can't really mimic this, but she walks down the hall, and if I'm say where Dan and Elizabeth are, she kind of smiled in my direction, but she didn't make eye contact. Okay? And I thought about it, and I just thought, okay, what this is a politeness thing, because she knows that if she looks at me full face in the eyes and smiles, then I have to break off my discussion with this other person and say, hi, or something, and acknowledge that. And she's trying to be polite, and she doesn't want me to have to break off. But at the same time, she smiles. She lets me see the smile. This is the Sperber and Wilson informing intention, as it were. So she's informing me that she's positively disposed, that she likes me by smiling, but she doesn't want it in the public space because that puts an obligation on me to respond to it. And and she doesn't want to impose that on me. And indeed, I think a lot of politeness things are exactly that. They're keeping things out of the domain of obligation because I don't want to put you under an obligation, so I'm keeping it out of the side. And for those of you who have never read the Brown and Levinson on politeness, it's a real eye-opener. I should have read it long ago, but I only read it fairly recently, and it gets in a lot of those directions. Okay, so again, I'm just trying to argue that human communication, we need to think about the different motivations involved separately, and we need to think about who's getting what out of it and why we're doing these cooperative things. And I think you can tell a story that draws on the same kinds of concepts. And Jean-Louis has done a number of things in this direction in some of his recent papers in the evolution of language about reputation and things like that as well. And so I recommend his papers. They go deeper into some of these things and in a different way than I am. But you can make a story, but you need to talk about the different types of interactions, the different kinds of social intentions, and I think you need to explain unique features of communication, like putting things in the public space, and you can then make the explanation in terms of social norms and indirect reciprocity, and perhaps strong reciprocity, because strong reciprocity, which again is controversial, but I'm just going to volunteer up stuff, and I'm not going to worry about whether I get anything out of it, and it probably needs group selection, and that's why people don't like it, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about. All right, so let me then end up with just one other thing, and that's at the bottom of page 9. I want to draw a little bit of I want to try to make an analogy between the two kinds of, I want to tell a little bit of a story about the two kinds of communication that we talked about with chimps yesterday. Attention getters and intention movements. And basically, the short story is that if attention getters that chimps do, where they slap the ground, look at me, but there's also this other version where they offer up the shoulder, for example, to ask you to groom it, or something like that, that what you need to get from those, what those are going to turn into is those are going to turn into this. Because what they're doing is, I'm trying to influence where you're looking or what you're attending to. So I want you to look at me, I want you to attend to my shoulder, okay? And so I'm trying to influence what you're looking at. When you get, okay, this is a little magic. Take attention getters, mix in some shared intentionality, and voila, out of the oven comes pointing. So I don't know how this happens, but when we start having shared intentionality, where we have a shared space of joint attentional space and this common thing that we have, and now I direct your attention to the chair, and it's not just like I'm holding out my shoulder hoping you'll do the right thing, but I want you to know that I intend the chair as plastic or the chair as location or whatever. So once you get the joint attentional frame, once you get the informing motives, the helpful motives, I again think, I didn't emphasize this, and this might be a discussion point, that I think you have to assume a helpful motive to get the relevance inference. So you have to assume that I'm being helpful, or at least either I'm being helpful or I want help when I refer you to the chair. I think you can see that chimps' attempts to influence attention, transformed by shared intentionality, get you to human-style attempts to influence attention by directing in a shared triadic space where the two of us are sharing attention to something over here in our general joint attentional frame. And then intention movements. I did a pretty poor job of managing my time today. I apologize for that. But the intention movements are more in the direction of characterizing gestures. Now, these kinds of things. So intention movements are things where the chimp is going like this, or threatening or whatever. So I'm doing the first part of the action, and I'm hoping to get the reaction that I would get from doing the whole activity. And they are tied to a specific context. So an intention movement with chimps is tied to the context within which the actual social interaction happens, and its meaning is taken from the social interaction itself, that the ritualized part is standing for, quote unquote. And so this kind of thing is, or some other kind of characterizing gesture, do it like this, so you're struggling with something and I say do it like this. Those kinds of things are tied to that context. This means nothing except when you're trying to open something and I'm trying to tell you that it rotates or something like that. So it's not a general look over here, look over there. It's do this or something more specific. So I think then again you get chimp intention movements and mix in a little shared intentionality, and out the other side you hopefully would get something like these characterizing gestures, which are tied to particular action and interactive contexts. Okay, so then let me summarize by just the very last section there, 2.5, summarizing. Humans communicate by publicly expressing their thoughts, feelings, and desires. It assumes a generally helpful social world, and there are actually norms on helpfulness. It assumes a social world concerned with reputation, and that's one of the things that maintains the helpfulness, and with group cohesion. I didn't emphasize that very much, but this is another possible motivation for sharing. We all know that sharing stuff with people makes us feel more intimate with them. So we share things with our wife that we don't share with other people. We share information. And in fact, you can kind of judge your relationship with somebody by how much they share with you and how much they don't share with you. And a lot of people have talked about this sharing as a kind of a group cohesion and bonding and whatever. We share a lot together. So it's possible, again, that there may be some other function with this sharing that creates some kind of group cohesion, which is very important in human evolution of human cultures as well, because we're us and we share a lot, and they're them and they don't share all this other stuff with us. And so this kind of communication, this publicly expressing our thoughts, feelings, and desires for the motives of helping and sharing, and when I say motives of helping, I also mean asking for help. The shared intentionality infrastructure, the skills of shared goals, intention, shared attention, shared knowledge, and the motivations of helping and sharing. I would argue in a specific sense that pointing is the most basic form of cooperative communication, of human cooperative communication, in the sense that there are a number of things that I would argue for that. Chimps spontaneously do something like pointing with humans. Human children point before they do characterizing gestures. I'll talk about that tomorrow. If you look around at people in their everyday lives, they point many orders of magnitude more. That's not grammatical. Much more often than they do any kind of characterizing gestures. That is independent of language, where the characterizing gesture itself is supposed to be the full act. So in any case, I think pointing is primary. Characterizing gestures are mainly for actions and absent references, and so they're for a subset of things. And I will just conclude with the thought that it's possible that cooperative forms of communication are actually critical to other forms of shared intentionality. So if you're going to tell the whole evolutionary story, you would want to know in what context did shared intentionality evolve. And one possibility is it evolved in communication specifically, because if you think about collaborative activities like chimpanzee group hunting, and I'll be happy to talk about that if anybody wants to ask about why that isn't shared intentionality. But chimpanzee group hunting, for example, it would be pretty hard to really have a complicated collaboration if we couldn't communicate in order to form a shared goal and to coordinate our plans ahead of time. Okay? So communication of the human type would be is a really important part of complex collaborations. So one could imagine communication being that shared intentionality evolving especially for communication and then influencing collaborative activities toward concrete goals. One could also imagine collaborative activities and then skills of shared intentionality evolving for collaborative activities, and that communication is one form of collaborative activity. One could imagine it in that direction as well. So I don't have a particular opinion or story there, but that would be an interesting thing to try to resolve in thinking about evolution of these things. So I guess my final concluding sentence would be the one that's at the very head of the whole lecture, that human cooperative gestures emanate from skills and motivations of shared intentionality that are broader and deeper than communication itself, even though they may have evolved for communication. So anyway, thank you.